No, I think it was because my daughter was interested in history and mythology.
Because mythology is such a sensitive subject in a country like India, especially.
So I try and look at the stories in a different way, in a non-traditional way. So if the Samudra Manthan, for example, has always been thought of as the churning of the ocean and the Amrit
Yes.
coming out. So now, after so many years, I've anyway done most of my research. I've read the Mahabharata maybe 3 times. The history of Magad, the first kings of Magad who are historical, Bimbisara and Ajatashatru. We usually take our historical record from the Buddhist and Jain texts and not from the Puranas.
So I read somewhere that there have been writers who have used AI and written and developed full books. And
The problem statement. So, for example, if I would type in why does X kill Y? What is the background? Can you give me ideas on motives?
Good morning, sir. Welcome to the first episode of the Ashoka podcast. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
How are you enjoying the Nasik air?
It's lovely. The weather is excellent right
Is
now.
it inspiring you to write more books?
Oh yes, absolutely.
The mythological history of Nasik.
Absolutely. I mean, Nasik is a holy town anyway, so there's lots of legend and tradition over here. So there's a lot of inspiration as well.
So I believe, if I'm not wrong, you started writing because of your daughter, right?
So my first book was written because of my daughter, but I've been writing since I was in school.
Yeah. So what made you think of, even while telling a story to your daughter, what made you think of this genre, this particular genre and this plot of the story, and not some other cliche classic which
So
a normal parent would read?
Yeah, no, I think it was because my daughter was interested in history and mythology. She used to read a lot, so it was natural to find something that she was interested in if I had to write a story.
So, of course, because your content revolves around mythology, a lot of stories that you write have already been existing for decades. So, how do you put your own twist to the stories that have been existing for such a long time?
So I try and look at the stories in a different way, in a non-traditional way, um, with a lot of respect, but without getting into the
Yes.
usual. So
Yeah.
so if the Samudra Manthan, for example, has always been thought of as the churning of the ocean and the Amrit
Yes.
coming out, and my take on it is, could it actually mean something different? Say a production
Yeah.
of a medicine that could prolong life.
Oh, okay.
So that's what makes it different.
So, writing a mythological fiction book is very different from writing a regular fictional novel or a book. So, what is your process of research and process of developing the book as a whole?
So now, after so many years, I've anyway done most of my research. I've read the Mahabharata maybe 3 times.
Oh, okay.
And the original Mahabharata, not the shortened versions. And I do a lot of research in history and science. So the new research is more on the science I want to use in the books, or the historical angles that I want to use in the book. So I do a lot of reading on that and then connect it to the stories
The
from
full
the
story.
Mahabharata. Yes.
So again, because your writing is spun around mythology a lot, because mythology is such a sensitive subject in a country like India, especially, do you think it's tough to balance your own beliefs and then the beliefs of, people who strongly believe in the past tales and the religions?
So I think the one of the wonderful things about India is that while we are very diverse,
Yeah.
we all share these common traditions.
Yes.
And I think while religion is there, so you can't deny that. But I think all of us, irrespective of what background we are from, religion, community, we've grown up listening to stories from the Mahabharata, and I'm talking about the Mahabharata because that's my area. So I don't see any conflict in that because you grow up hearing about the Pandavas and the Kauravas and everything else that's there in the Mahabharata. So it actually is pretty natural, and I think that's the same about my readers. Uh, my readers span all religions, And the Mahabharata actually is very different from all the Purans and even the Ramayana. One respect is the historical aspect, where, so for example, when I do my historical research, a lot of historians through the ages, through the last couple hundred years, and even now, a lot of historians tend to view the Purans as non-historical in a certain way, because very often they clash with contemporary Buddhist and Jain texts, like the Mahavansh and some of the others, which were written around the same time. So our history, for example, I don't want to get too much into this, but the context is important. The history of Magad, the first kings of Magad who are historical, Bimbisara and Ajatashatru. We usually take our historical record from the Buddhist and Jain texts and not from the Purans. Because the Purans have conflicting versions even among the Purans. Even if you look at the 18 Mahapurans, the same story is told in different ways. So which one do you believe? So from a historical angle, from a literary angle, it's totally different. And the Mahabharata, on the other hand, is something which, again, historically, there's no archaeological evidence for any of the events in the Mahabharata. But the Mahabharata is itself claims that it is a record. It says that it is itihasa, which means this is what happened. And what I've always found fascinating is that this kind of turns it on its head. So the example that you're talking about, where was Sri Lanka was Ravan's Lanka, Sri Lanka or something else, and therefore is the Ram Setu the real Ram Setu or not? So I'm not qualified to talk about that. I haven't done that kind of research in there. But in the Mahabharata, it's you can question a lot of the stories in the Mahabharata. But I think what's very interesting is that if you look deeper in the Mahabharata, and this is what I've been trying to do, you can actually show that there is an explanation for some of those stories. So it is possible that some of those stories could have actually happened, even though we don't have the evidence to prove it. And that's some of the research that I've done is very interesting, because when you go into the Sanskrit shlokas, you can see the evidence in the Sanskrit itself. If you interpret it in a non-traditional way, if you go in looking at it in the traditional way and say, okay, this is what it was, this is the story, like the Samudra Manthan, for example. You say, okay, it's the Asuras and the Devs, and then that becomes kind of mythological.
Yeah.
But what if it wasn't really the Asuras and the Devs? And if you read the Adiparv, you will see that it's very interesting. There are parts of it, and I actually explained this in one of my books, The Alexander Secret. There are parts of the shlokas which actually talk not about an ocean of milk, but a pot of milk which is not churned, but it is stirred. It's mixed. And then when you read that, at least when I read that, it was like this is describing some sort of a manufacturing process, production process, where you bring ingredients. So you bring herbs, they say jewels, money, but these need not necessarily be precious stones. These could be medicinal stones, which you can crush and use, minerals basically, right? And because all of this comes from the ocean. The ocean is consistently described in the Mahabharata as a mine of gems. Now we all know we can't produce precious stones from the Mahabharata, from the ocean, but the ocean has minerals in it. Yes. So what if the reference over there to those gems is minerals which chemically, with mixed with other ingredients, can produce something called the Amrit. And what's interesting is that there is science that explains how the Amrit could have actually worked. So for me, it's actually the converse. It's not so much about uh, are these stories just made up?
Yeah.
But for me, it's about, okay, is it possible that something at the heart of the story
Can be interpreted differently.
And maybe the story has been created just to make it more interesting and memorable. We remember it thousands of years later.
Yes.
Right?
So I think I would like to shift to writing, the writing part of it. So I read somewhere that there have been writers who have used AI and written and developed full books and sold 500 to 600 copies of their own and actually earned money. So what do you think about that aspect of writing and what AI is doing to the career field you are into?
So I think, at least today, um, there is a lot of work that a writer has to do to make a story original. You could use AI to write a story, but it will be very, very similar to some other story because that's what AI is really doing. The machine learning algorithms are picking up existing
Yes, yes.
data
They're
and
getting trained very quickly.
yes, but they're using data that's already there in
Yeah.
the public domain. And therefore any story you write will be like any other story in the public domain. There will not be any originality in it. AI cannot think.
Yeah.
AI is not creative. And therefore, if AI has to write an original story, it cannot because it can't think. It can write a story that has elements of other stories in the past, but it cannot produce an original story because it has not learned. There's no algorithm that exists today, at least, which enables AI to think the way we humans
Yeah.
do. So, there are times I wake up in the middle of the night and I have an idea.
Yeah.
I say, oh, wow, this is a great idea. I cannot see AI doing that. Suddenly popping over and say, hey, I've got a
Yes.
great idea for
Yeah.
you to write, a story.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening unless there's a development where somehow they manage to mimic how the brain works
Yes.
for creativity.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be difficult because I don't think anyone understands how the brain works.
Yeah. Even the scientists are still researching. So it's going to take a little more time.
Yeah, so I don't think, at least if you're saying looking at a horizon of 10, 15, 20 years, I don't think AI is going to get creative. AI is going to be very good at summarizing data, giving you snapshots. It's very good, going to be very good as a time-saving tool if you want information. So instead of spending 1 hour searching on a search engine for information, you could go into say a chat GPT and say, I want information on this. Give me,
Yes.
or suggest 5 white papers. If I want to do science research or history research, I'll say I want to know what happened in these 3 years of Alexander the Great's life, and the AI will give me the information.
Yeah. So it's not going to necessarily be able to think creatively, but it's going to be very good in terms of research.
Yes, and I think for the education field, I think schools and colleges can use it very, very well because it's doing the same thing. Instead of your textbooks, you can have AI, which can be interactive and can teach you, and you can ask questions. So teachers can focus on other things.
Yeah.
Like one-to-one instead of teaching everything.
Yes.
Focus on one-to-one development of each child, and AI does the actual, knowledge imparting, which is traditionally what the teachers do.
So now that the writing field, at least today, is being accepted way more, I think, than it was, way before. The society has started considering it as a real career, especially in India. So, what do you think aspiring authors such as myself should inculcate habits that can make us better at writing, or keep us consistent while writing? Because consistency, I think, is a big problem when you're writing creatively, or when you're writing poetry or novels as a whole.
So I think the single biggest thing any aspiring writer should do is to read, and read a lot.
Yeah.
And read across genres, read stuff that you wouldn't normally read. Because what I find a lot of people doing is they say, I read a lot. And then I ask them, what do you read? And they say, I like this genre. I say, what about this?
Yeah.
What about, if you read fiction, what about non-fiction? They say, no, we don't like.
Yes.
And that I think is a constraint because the more you read, the more diversity there is in your reading list, the more you learn. And that brings out the consistency. That's how you develop your own style. So I think reading a lot is the key.
And writing habits, any like writing, so just writing 5 lines daily or something like that.
So again, it differs from person to person. Not everyone can write. I don't write daily.
Yeah.
I only write when I'm writing a story, when I need to write. Otherwise, a lot of my time goes in research. So and I find that if all the reading I do for research, it makes my writing much easier.
Much easier.
Because I've got so much information that. So, for example, a lot of people ask me, how do you tackle writer's block? And I say, my answer is always, I don't get writer's block once I've started. Before I start a story or a book or or anything, any story, the writer's block I have is, okay, what am I going to write? But once I've started writing, because I've done my research, I don't stop.
Just connects.
Yeah. So it differs from person to person. There's no formula, that you write 5 hours a day, 3 hours a day. I know there are some writers who recommend you must write 1,000
follow a
words a day.
schedule.
Yeah. I think I don't think it's fair to impose it on someone who's not comfortable doing it.
So, do you think now that you're talking about the writer's block, do you think it exists? Because a lot of writers think that writer's block as a whole does not exist, and then there is a lot who thinks that it actually does exist and you can get over it.
Yeah, so I think it exists. So, like I told you, when I'm between books, between stories, I've finished one and I'm starting the next one. So, this year, for example, I've written 1, 2, 3 back-to-back stories in the first 6 months.
Okay.
So I had to switch very rapidly between stories, and the most difficult part was getting the old story out and then say, okay, now what do I write that's different from what I've just written, because I don't want it to sound the same. And that's really writer's block, because you don't know where to start. And you've got a blank sheet of paper in front of you, you say, okay, where do I go from here? But that's where the research helps. So I think writer's block it does exist. There are people who get writer's block while they're writing, but I feel that's because the research is not adequate. Because then the reason why you stop is because you're not sure what to write, because you don't have the background information, or you haven't developed uh, you know uh, the backstory, which doesn't come into the story at all. It's the historical context. So if you're writing a story, it doesn't matter what genre. Let's say you're writing a story set in 2024. You do need to know what happened in 2004, 20 years ago, which is influencing events in that story today. Whether it's a murder mystery, it's a thriller, it's a love story, it doesn't matter. There will always be events in the past which will influence what you're writing in the story today. Now, if you're not clear about what's happened in the past, you cannot write what's happening today. It's like real life. Your life today is based on what happened in the past. It's exactly the same. So I think when people get writer's block, it is because they've not spent enough time in doing the research and the preparation before they start writing. And then I always advocate to people, if they get writer's block, for me, the simplest way to get over it is go and read a book.
Okay. So, while writing a book, while you're the story aspect of it, do you think it is more tough to start the story, or do you think it's more tough to end the story?
I think for me personally, it's always more difficult to start the story. And that's because I'm very, very particular that I need to write something that's different from what it may be part of a series that I'm writing. So the flavor would be the same, but the story has to be different. The last thing any writer should, this is something all writers should fear. You need to have that fear in you and that nervousness in you, so that you're not overconfident. Is that when I finish writing this book and it's published, a reader shouldn't say, "Oh, it's exactly the same as the other." Then I think you've not succeeded as a writer.
So, do you think in that way you write for some part of your writing is based off of what your customers want to read or what your readers want to read, or it is wholly based off of your own belief of the story?
No, it's completely me.
Oh, it's completely you.
Yeah. If I don't enjoy writing the story, then I won't write it.
So, how do you develop your characters in the story? When you are writing, do you feel connected to the character? Do you imagine yourself in the place of the character? How does the process?
Yes, I normally do that. I try and put myself in the shoes of the character. It also gives readers surprises at times, because when you do too much planning, and I'm not saying you shouldn't plan, because there's some people who are much more comfortable planning first. But I think for me, if I plan too much for a character, then I may give away certain things which I shouldn't be giving away. But when I'm writing spontaneously, putting myself in the character, because look, as humans in real life, you can't predict everyone. You can't say this person is going to do this. Sometimes we get surprised by people. They say, "Oh, where did that come from? I've never seen this. I didn't see that coming." And in books, it's important for that to happen, because then that makes it more entertaining for the reader.
Yes, it does. So, because you originally started writing after you had cultivated a story for your daughter. After that, when you decided that you wanted to publish a book, was publishing tough? Was publishing tough, because a lot of authors who have spontaneously become authors consider self-publishing. So, did you consider at some point of time in your career to self-publish other than a different publisher, getting a different publisher?
Yeah, so it took a lot. It took 5 years to get published. Lots of rejections. And yeah, I think I had eventually decided that, look, if I don't succeed anywhere, then I'd probably look at self-publishing. Uh, this was, I got published first 11 years ago. So at that time, you didn't have as many options for self-publishing as you have today. You just had one or two options. So that was going to be the last option for me. But then I kept saying, let me try more. Let me see. Let me exhaust all the possibilities first. And if then it doesn't work out, then I go for self-publishing. So I think then it worked out. Then I got published. So I didn't have to go for self.
So in the end, I would just like to ask, you are still writing. So now you've specifically written on Mahabharata, if I'm not wrong. So are you planning on researching more on the different mythological stories we've been told, like the Ramayana? Are you planning to research more on that and then write books based off of that, or you're just sticking to Mahabharata?
So I'm sticking to a base of the Mahabharata.
Yeah.
But I'm exploring other. I'm not exploring the Ramayana because I think too many people have written
Yeah.
about the Ramayana. So it's become, and the Ramayana is a linear story. It starts. The Mahabharata is much more complex.
Yes.
So I find much more content in the Mahabharata to write on.
Thank you so much, sir. It was great having you. It was very interesting conversing with you. Now, even I'm motivated to research so much on the Mahabharata because we know so much about the Ramayana, and Mahabharata is not so much, no one has looked in such a depth into Mahabharata as a whole. So I'm very excited now.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you
Thank you so
thank you
much.
for having me here.
Have a great day.
You too.